Listen to me. For 30 seconds, I want you to imagine every worry you carry, the fear in your chest, the pressure on your shoulders, the questions that haunt your mind at night. Imagine placing all of it into the hands of the one who created heaven and earth. Imagine stepping back and watching High Tibartan M take it from you. Feel your heart breathe again. Feel your soul lighten. For when you truly release what burdens you, heaven begins to move. This moment is the turning point of your life. Stop holding what God never asked you to carry. We were not created to live crushed by worry, chained by fear, burdened, or imprisoned by anxiety. The God who breathes galaxies into existence did not design you to drown in the small waves of this world. You are not sustained by human strength, you are upheld by divine grace. When you try to carry everything alone, you step into a role that belongs only to God. Faith is not trying harder. Faith is surrendering deeper. There comes a holy moment in every believer's life when God whispers, "Place it in my hands, not tomorrow, not someday, now." Because as long as your hands are full of fear, your heart cannot receive peace. As long as your emotions cling to control and all, your spirit cannot rise in freedom. You are strong not when you fight every battle, but when you refuse to fight battles that belong to the Lord. Listen carefully. Emotional detachment is not a lack of love. It is the refusal to let fear control love. When you release what you cannot change, it is not that you stop caring, it is that you start believing. Detachment is confidence in God's plan. Detachment is peace in motion. Detachment is the soul's declaration. God is in control, so I will not be shaken. What happens in your life is not what destroys you. It is your attachment to to worry, to outcomes. The enemy of peace is not the storm, but your desperate need to predict the wind. You do not need answers, you need trust. You do not need control, you need surrender. The universe bends to the voice of God, and when you trust Him, your life bends toward blessing. Do not be afraid to let go. When you release it, God replaces it. When you surrender it, heaven secures it. When you stop worrying, you make room for miracles. He cannot fill a clenched fist, He fills open hands. To detach from fear is not abandoning responsibility. It is choosing divine partnership over human pressure. It is saying, God, I step back so you can step forward. Every burden you release is a seed planted in the soil of faith. Every fear surrendered becomes a doorway for heaven's peace. And when you walk without worry, you walk like a king's child, unshaken, unafraid, unstoppable. Sea world sees you and asks, why do you not panic? And your heart answers, because I know who carries my life. So today, release it. Put every burden in His hands. Refuse to let worry claim another breath of your life. You were born to trust Him. You were created to rest in Him. Be still inside. Detach from fear. Stand in faith. And watch, everything will change. For those who trust in the Lord shall not break, shall not bend, shall not sink, they shall rise. And today, you rise. Surrender is not weakness. It is the highest spiritual strength. For only those who trust God fully can release what they cannot control. When the world hears the word surrender, it imagines defeat, collapse, helplessness. But in the kingdom of God, surrender is victory. It is the moment a human being steps out of human limits and steps into divine power. It is the moment the soul stops striving and living in grace. The strongest person is not the one who fights the hardest. It is the one who knows when to lay the sword at the feet of the Almighty and say, Lord, this battle is yours. You see, the world teaches you to fight for everything, to push, to force, to hold tightly, to plan ever no outcome, to carry every responsibility on trembling shoulders. But the voice of heaven whispers, be still and know that I am God. There is a strength that only comes when you stop leaning on your own strength. There is a peace that only arrives when you stop trying to control every direction and DDRD every outcome. The moment you let go is the moment God takes over. Many people confuse surrender with giving up. No, giving up is what you do when you are defeated. Surrender is what you do when you understand who is in control. Giving up is the language of despair. Surrender is the language of F&BR day 8th. Giving up says, I cannot. Surrender says, He can. When you truly surrender, you open the door for miracles, because miracles do not visit those who depend on their own ability. Miracles visit those who depend on God. The soul that fights to stay in control lives in constant tension, angst, anxiety, and exhaustion. But the soul that releases everything into God's hands breathes again. The enemy wants you busy, anxious, overwhelmed, burdened, because a weary believer cannot see clearly, cannot hear heaven clearly, and cannot stand firmly. But when you surrender, your vision clears, your SPSER strengthens, and your heart settles into peace. It is in surrender that your spiritual strength awakens. Let me tell you, you do not surrender because you are weak. You surrender because you are wise. Wisdom recognizes divine order. Wisdom sees that human limitation is not failure. It is invitation to trust God beyond what you understand. Invitation to rest while He works. Invitation to walk by faith, not by sight. Some of you have been carrying burdens too heavy for too long. You have tried to fix what only God can heal. You have tried to control what only God can govern. Why, Barno, we've tried to open doors only God can unlock. You have held fears that were never meant to live in your soul. You have cried tears God never intended you to cry. And still, you try. Still, you grip life with trembling hands, afraid to release, afraid to trust, afraid to rest. But hear me, surrender TPR is not stepping back. Surrender is stepping up into God's order. Surrender does not shrink your life. Surrender enlarges it. Surrender does not weaken. You surrender empowers you. When you stop resisting God's hand, His hand carries you. When you stop wrestling life in your strength, His strength and GRGH surrounds you. Your greatest peace will come, not when you control everything, but when you release everything. Do you know what surrender really means? It means believing God's plan is better than your anxiety. It means trusting His timing over your deadlines. It means choosing His wisdom over worry. It means saying, Lord, even if I do not understand, I trust you. What power does fear have over someone who has already surrendered everything to God? None. What pressure can break the heart that has already placed every burden at the feet of Jesus? None. When you surrender, your circumstances may not immediately change, but you change. Your spirit becomes still. Your emotions loosen their grip. Your mind breathes again. And in that stillness, God moves. The enemy trembles when a believer surrenders, because that believer becomes unstoppable. Why? Because a surrendered soul can be manipulated by fear. A surrendered heart cannot be shaken by uncertainty. A surrendered life cannot be trapped by the enemy's lies, for it rests in God's truth. True strength is to kneel. True power is to trust. True victory is to surrender and rise in the strength of the one who never fails. Emotional detachment is not apathy, it is spiritual maturity. The ability to stay rooted in faith while storms rage around you. When the heart is immature, it clings desperately to things, people, outcomes, and expectations. It tries to shape the world by force, to control what cannot be controlled, to demand certainty where God has chosen mystery. But when the soul matures in the presence of God, It learns a higher posture, the calm strength of release, the holy discipline of letting go, the deep confidence that nothing truly meant for you can be taken from you, and nothing that leaves you and your life was ever your foundation to begin with. People think emotional detachment means not caring, but that is a misunderstanding born from fear. Detachment means you still love, but your peace does not depend on being loved back. You still do your best, but you are not destroyed when results take time. You still pray for blessings, but you are not shaken if the blessing arrives at an unexpected hour. It is not the absence of emotion, it is the mastery of it. The heart anchored in God does not drown in every wave. The spirit resting in Him does not fall apart when life bends in an unfamiliar direction. You can walk through fire and not panic, because your peace is rooted in someone greater than circumstance. Do you know why some believers collapse so quickly under pressure? Because their trust is tied to outcomes, not to God. They believe until something shakes. They pray until something delays. They worship until life challenges their comfort. But the spiritually mature believer says, Lord, even here I trust you. Even now I rest in you. Even when I cannot trace your hand, I trust your heart. This is the strength of detachment, to stand firm, not because everything is easy to burden, but because your heart is anchored in the eternal. Emotional detachment means learning to rise above reaction. It is the holy discipline of not allowing emotions to rule you. Feel them, yes. Acknowledge them, yes. But do not be governed by them. Fear may shout, but faith whispers louder. Anxiety may knock, but peace has already built a home inside you. The difference between weakness and maturity is simple. Weakness reacts. Maturity responds with wisdom and patience. Weakness clings, maturity releases. Weakness fears losing, maturity knows God replaces, God restores, God sustains, and God protects what He has ordained. There is a place in God where you can love deeply and still remain unshaken, where you show up with passion, but do not collapse when life takes a turn you did not expect. This is kingdom strength, to feel everything, yet be mastered by nothing but the Spirit of God, to stand calm in situations that once terrified you, to remain gentle where you once felt desperate, to choose peace where you once chose panic. When life tests you, and it will, the spiritually mature do not break. They breathe, they surrender, and they rise. The believer rooted in God does not chase what runs away, nor does he beg the world to give what only heaven can supply. Faith does not cling out of fear. Faith releases with trust. For when you hold on too tightly, you suffer. When you loosen your grip, God moves. The emotionally mature soul understands attachment to outcomes is bondage, but attachment to God is freedom. And here, this carefully emotional detachment does not make you cold, it makes you secure. It does not remove compassion. It removes desperation. It does not kill love. It purifies it. You do not detach because you are indifferent. You detach because you know who is in charge of your destiny. You detach because you understand that your joy does not come from circumstance, but from His presence. You detach because you know God is not limited by what leaves you, what changes, or what shifts in life. There is a profound peace that comes when you stop trying to control people, their opinions, their choices, and your future. Peace arrives when you trust God more than your emotions. And when you reach this level of maturity, life can shake, but you will not fall. Situations can change, but you will not lose yourself. People may disappoint, but you will not crumble, because your foundation is unmovable. This is true spiritual maturity, to walk through life with open hands, open heart, and open trust, knowing that nothing has more authority over your peace than the God who holds you. When you reach that place, Fear loses its voice, anxiety loses its endless grip, and faith becomes your constant companion. And from that place, you do not just survive life, you transcend it. The heart at rest becomes a vessel of divine power, for God fills the soul that stops striving and starts trusting. There is a sacred stillness that only comes when a believer true and deeply understands that God is not moved by panic, but by faith. Heaven does not accelerate because you fear, nor does it delay because you rush. Divine power flows most freely through the life that has learned to quiet the storms within. When your heart is anxious, you become blind to what God is doing, that He art. But when your heart is at rest, you begin to see with heaven's eyesight, to hear God's whisper, and to walk in supernatural confidence. So many people live as though they must constantly prove themselves, fight every invisible battle, defend every thought, and climb every mountain by their own strength. But the truth is this: striving drains you of spiritual force, while resting in God multiplies your strength. Rest is not inactivity. Rest is faith in motion. It is a declaration that says, I trust God enough to stop forcing what only He can fulfill. When your soul enters true rest, you stop chasing what God has already assigned to you. You stop fearing what God has already defeated. You stop worrying about tomorrows that He has already prepared. There is a strength in stillness that the world cannot understand. The world glorifies hustle, pressure, non-stop motion, and constant ving. But the Spirit glorifies surrender, obedience, inner peace, and divine reliance. The most powerful moves of God often come in moments when the believer chooses to wait instead of rush, to breathe instead of panic, to trust instead of doubt. A rested spirit hears God clearly. A troubled spirit reacts. A rested spirit responds with wisdom. A restless heart chases answers. A rested heart receives revelation. Do you know why rest is such a weapon in the spiritual realm? Because worry gives authority to the enemy, but rest gives authority to God in your life. Worry screams, what if? Rest, whispers, even if. Worry imagines chaos. Rest sees God's hand already working. Worry attaches you to problems. Rest attaches you to promises. When you are at peace, the enemy loses ground, fear loses its grip, and miracles find an open door. There will come a moment in your journey with God when will realize that deep spiritual maturity is not shown in how loud you shout, how hard you try, or how much you push, but in how fully you trust. True power is not found in striving harder, but believing deeper. Your soul becomes a channel of God's presence when you stop trying to control outcome and begin resting in His sovereignty. Peace is not the absence of battle. It is standing in battle without losing your inner stillness. That is where divine strength lives. Think of it like a river. A river flows effortlessly, yet it carves canyons, shapes landscapes, and gives life. It moves with and percentage power, not by force, but by consistent, steady flow. The believer who rests in God becomes like that. River constant, unshakable, unstoppable, guided by a force greater than themselves. The power of God cannot fully flow through the heart that is always tense, always fearful, always trying to run a burden ahead of heaven. But the rested heart, that heart becomes a sanctuary where glory dwells. Rest is not laziness. It is not passivity. It is alignment with divine rhythm. It is saying, Lord, I will move when you move. I will wait when you tell me to wait. It is walking through life with unhurried confidence, anchored in the conviction that God's timing is perfect, His plan is flawless, and His strength is enough. The rested believer does not react to pressure, they respond to the Spirit. And hear this, rest is an act of warfare. To rest in God while the world shakes around you is to declare that you belong to a kingdom not affected by earthly storms. To rest in God when others panic is to carry heaven's atmosphere in the midst of chaos. Rest is faith clothed in silence, trust wrapped in stillness. And when your heart enters that rest, God's presence becomes your armor, your peace becomes your shield, and His power flows through you effortlessly. So let your soul exhale, let your spirit settle, release what you cannot control. Trust what He has already ordained. For when you rest in Him, you do not lose ground, you gain strength. You do not fall behind, you step into His timing. And in that holy rest, your life becomes a testimony of what God can do through the one who trusts instead of strives. The heart at rest is not empty. It is filled with power, filled with peace, and filled with God. Fear dissolves where faith lives, and every burden handed to God becomes a testimony, bendigory, waiting to manifest. Fear feeds on the illusion of control. It grows when we hold life in our own hands and tremble at the thought of losing it. But faith breathes in the atmosphere of surrender, and where surrender lives, fear suffocates. Faith is not merely believing God exists. Faith is recognizing He governs every breath you take, every path you walk, every blessing destined for your life. And when that truth sinks into your spirit, fear has no room to rule you anymore. Fear always speaks of loss, of uncertainty, of danger around the unseen corner. But faith speaks of promise, of divine orchestration, of God's hand leading you into prepared places. Fear looks at the storm. Faith sees the one who commands the wind. Fear clings to what is familiar. Faith steps into what is ordained. Fear reacts to circumstance. Faith responds to God. And when you truly live in faith, fear becomes a stranger that cannot find a home in your heart. Look at your life, the moments you worried, the nights you couldn't sleep, the days anxiety sat heavy on your chest. Did your worrying ever change anything? Did your fear ever bring breakthrough? No. Fear is noise, faith is power. Fear drains you, faith, restores you. Fear shows you problems. Faith reveals possibilities. And when you actively hand your burdens to God, heaven begins to transform what once tormented you. What you release becomes seed. What you cling to becomes weight. Every time you say, Lord, this is yours, you shift your life from human effort to divine intervention. There are things in your life right now waiting to bloom, but they cannot rise while your heart is clenched with worry. Faith opens the hand, fear tightens it. Faith trusts the unseen, fear demands proof. Faith says, God will, while fear whispers, doten or at if He doesn't. Yet the believer who walks in covenant knows God cannot fail. His promises are not fragile. His word does not expire. His plan does not collapse because of human weakness or unexpected detours. Understand this deeply. Fear dissolves not by force, but by revelation. You don't conquer fear by fighting it. You conquer fear by believing truth so deeply that fear has no ground to stand on. When you know that God is for you, fear's threats lose their authority. When you realize He is carrying you, life's uncertainties cannot shake you. When you truly trust His timing, His wisdom, His protection and His provision, your heart becomes anchored in a peace that nothing can break. Do not mistake faith for emotion. Faith is not the trembling excitement of a good moment. Faith is the quiet conviction in the middle of the valley that says, God has not left me. God is working even now. God's plan will not fail. Faith is not loud. Faith is steady. Faith does not panic. When the ground shakes, it stands, knowing God is the foundation. Faith does not need immediate evidence. Faith rests in eternal truth. Every burden surrendered becomes a testimony in motion. Some testimonies take time to fully reveal. Some bloom slowly like dawn breaking over dark mountains. Others erupt suddenly like a flood of light. But all surrendered things return transformed. What you give to God never comes back empty. It comes back holy, multiplied, purified, aligned with destiny. The probable NTBRM is never whether God will move. The question is always whether you will trust long enough to see his hand. The enemy fears a believer who knows how to surrender, because that believer cannot be manipulated by fear or circumstance. That believer walks through trials with calm, through uncertainty with confidence, through loss with dignity, through waiting with patience. That believer does not collapse when life shakes. They stand, because their foundation is not sand but spirit. So release every burden. Hand him every fear, every doubt, every question, every timeline, every worry about the future. Lay it down. Speak it, Lord, it is yours. And then walk away from the weight you once carried, knowing heaven is now moving where your hands once struggled. For when faith rises, fear dissolves. When surrender begins, miracles follow. And when God takes the burden, your life becomes a Eleanor surviving testimony, a story written by divine hands, a chapter filled with grace, and a future marked by glory. Beloved, you have heard the call to release, to surrender, to detach, and to rest in the one who rules heaven and earth. You have been reminded that true strength is not found in grasping time or later, but in trusting deeper. You now know that the soul anchored in God does not crumble under pressure, does not drown in uncertainty, and does not bow to fear. Instead, it rises steady, calm, unshaken. So now, in this holy moment, choose your freedom. Step out of the prison of worry. Lay down the weight you have carried for too long. Lift your heart toward the God who never fails, who never sleeps, who never leaves you to carry life alone. Let every burden fall from your spirit like chains breaking in the presence of divine fire. Let your soul breathe again. For the one who is with you, Ibar is greater than anything that stands before you. From this day forward, walk differently. Walk with peace that does not tremble. Walk with courage that does not waver. Walk with faith that sees beyond the surface. Walk like someone who knows heaven stands behind them. Walk like someone who has Soren and dared not in defeat, but in victory. Because when you place your life, your future, your dreams and your fears into God's hands, you do not lose control, you gain destiny. Let your heart rest. Let your faith rise. Let fear fall silent, and let every step you take be a testimony that the God UTR is faithful, powerful, and present. You are not alone. You are guided. You are protected. You are held. And what God has begun in you, he will finish. Go now with a quiet strength in your spirit and a confidence that cannot be shaken. The battle is not yours. It never was. It belongs to God, and Enibardi in his hands. You are unstoppable.